It was a quiet Sunday morning when the world of faith stood still. News began to spread. President Russell M. Nelson, the beloved leader of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, had passed away peacefully in his sleep. For millions across the world, it didn't feel real. Just days earlier, people had watched him speak with his usual warmth and strength, urging everyone to hold on to faith, hope, and kindness. But now, that familiar voice had gone silent. The news hit like a wave no one was ready for. Families who had followed his teachings for decades suddenly found themselves in tears. Members began calling one another, praying it wasn't true. But when official confirmation came, a deep stillness spread across every community. Russell M. Nelson wasn't just a church president. To many, he was a father figure, a spiritual guide whose words had comforted millions. His teachings on forgiveness, patience, and unwavering faith had touched hearts across generations. People remembered his gentle smile, his calm tone, and the peace his presence brought. Soon, news channels and church pages began sharing his story. His faith, his service, his legacy. Every headline carried the same emotion: loss, love, and respect. Across the globe, church buildings lowered their flags. Thousands flooded social media with tributes, photos of President Nelson surrounded by children, families, and missionaries. It was as if the entire world had gathered to say, "Thank you. Thank you for the wisdom. Thank you for the kindness. Thank you for the hope." For countless members, this was one of the hardest moments in memory. Even those who had never met him personally felt the loss deeply, because his words had reached their homes, their hearts, their lives. Among those most affected was Elder Jeffrey R. Holland, a man who had served side by side with President Nelson for years. Those close to him said he went quiet the moment he heard the news. He didn't speak much that day. He simply sat in his study, surrounded by letters and photographs that told the story of their friendship. To Elder Holland, President Nelson wasn't just a leader. He was a brother. That first day after the announcement felt endless. Church bells rang. Families prayed together. Congregations gathered in quiet mourning. How do you say goodbye to someone who changed so many lives? But amid the sadness, one truth began to shine. President Nelson's light would never fade. Even in his passing, his faith continued to guide the hearts he had touched. In the days that followed, grief spread across every corner of the world. From small Utah towns to distant countries across oceans, members described the same emptiness. It felt as though a guiding star had gone out. Temples that once echoed with hymns now stood in silence. But within that silence, people came together, to mourn, to pray, to remember. Everywhere stories were shared. People spoke about how President Nelson had changed them, through his compassion, his humility, and his gentle strength. Parents told their children about his teachings. Missionaries recalled his warmth. Even strangers shared memories of how his words had carried them through life's hardest storms. In Salt Lake City, temple grounds became a place of reflection. Thousands came, some with flowers, others with tears. Families stood hand in hand. Missionaries knelt in prayer. And as they looked toward the temple spires, many whispered the same words. "We will miss you, President Nelson. But your spirit lives on." As days passed, one question echoed among church members everywhere. Where is Elder Jeffrey R. Holland? For years, he had been a familiar voice of comfort, steady, inspiring, full of faith. But now he had gone silent. There were no public statements, no social media posts, no interviews. It was as if his silence spoke louder than words. Those close to him said that grief had struck deeply. Elder Holland and President Nelson had shared a bond that went far beyond leadership. They had prayed together, traveled together, and leaned on each other through every trial. Now, with his friend gone, Elder Holland found himself alone with his memories. In his study, surrounded by old letters and photographs, he spent hours reflecting. On his desk sat a framed photo, the two of them standing side by side at a church conference, smiling with hope and purpose. Friends who visited said he spoke softly. "He was more than a leader," Elder Holland whispered one day. "He was my brother." For Elder Holland, grief was sacred. He didn't rush it. He didn't hide from it. He spent mornings by his window, reading scriptures, each verse reminding him of President Nelson's example. On his desk lay one particular letter, a note from years ago, written in Nelson's gentle hand. "We lead not by power but by love." Those words echoed now like a whisper from heaven. At night, Elder Holland prayed, not asking why but thanking God for friendship, for lessons, for faith. He prayed in gratitude for the years they had shared, and for the hope of eternal reunion. Days turned into weeks, and still he remained quiet. But the world waited. Members knew that when Elder Holland finally spoke, his words would come from the depths of his heart. Then, one evening, the church announced a special devotional service in Salt Lake City, to honor President Russell M. Nelson's memory. Members from around the world tuned in. The air was heavy with emotion, and when Elder Holland walked onto the stage, the entire hall fell silent. He stood for a moment, his hand resting gently on the pulpit. His eyes were wet with emotion. "Brothers and sisters," he began softly, "my heart is heavy today." He paused, steadying his voice. "I miss my dear friend, President Russell M. Nelson. We shared not only responsibilities, but prayers, laughter, and many sacred moments together. His kindness touched me in ways words cannot express." The room was completely silent. Some wiped tears, others bowed their heads. Elder Holland continued, his tone filled with warmth and reverence. "President Nelson's life was a living testimony of Christ-like love. Even in sorrow we have reason to be thankful. Thankful for his example, for his wisdom, and for the eternal truths he taught." He paused again, then smiled gently. "President Nelson often reminded us," he said, "the Lord's work does not stop when we leave this life, it only changes form. And today, I believe that with all my heart." As he finished, a quiet peace filled the hall. It wasn't just a farewell. It was a reminder that faith continues, love endures, and life through Christ never truly ends. For those watching across the world, Elder Holland's words were more than a tribute. They were healing. And as the closing hymn began, the feeling was clear. Though President Russell M. Nelson had departed this world, his light and his legacy would shine forever.